In Atlanta, Angela arrives with us. She is the former executive director of the Congressional Black Caucus, a lawyer and a CNN contributor. And in Paris, Bernard-Henri Lévy. He is perhaps France's best-known philosopher. He is an author, an activist, and a frequent visitor to America. Bernard, let me start with you and ask you, what does it look like to you? You are a great lover of the United States. You wrote a book once where you retraced Tocqueville's footsteps in America. When you hear about a week like this, when you watch it, what do you make of it?
My dear Farid, I can hardly hear you because it is a very special day today in France, as you can hear. It is the day of the last match, of the football match, so it's very noisy around. But I heard you. What is very sad for me, I was remembering all the week the first speech I ever heard from Barack Obama. It was 12 years ago. He was in Boston, in the Democratic Convention of Boston. He said, there is no longer white America and black America. There is no longer red America or blue America. There is United States of America. When you see the situation post-Ferguson, post-Baltimore and post-Dallas, it is so much heartbreaking. And the friend of America who I am and who we all are in Paris, we are really concerned about what is happening in the United States of America these days. We have to face that with all possible cold blood, of course. I know that America will prevail on that, but it is in a way so sad and so heartbreaking.
Lanre, when you look at this, you wrote something in The Guardian that I was very struck by. You talked about the contrast between your experience as a man of African origin in Britain versus in America. Explain how those are different.
Well, I suppose in the UK there's problems with policing. This year we saw the Hillsborough inquest, and 27 years after the incident, finally the 96 Liverpool fans got their justice. Policing in the UK, there can be problems around race. We've seen Stephen Lawrence and what happened there. But when there are interactions with police officers and people of colour in the UK, they're very rarely deadly. That seems to be the difference. When I came to America, when I first got in the autumn of 2014, there was Eric Gardner, there was Michael Brown, there were Mackay Gurley. There was this kind of run of young African American men who were unarmed being killed by the police, and that is just shocking. It's shocking to be in a country where you are exposed to that, and that's on your doorstep around the corner.
Now, part of that, Lanre, is that in Britain, correct me if I'm wrong, most cops aren't armed. I mean, in the United States, the general population is armed, but in Britain, even the bobbies, even the police officers don't have guns.
Exactly.
But how much of it is also a difference in terms of the kind of trust and interaction, you know, the profiling that takes place immediately by both sides?
Well, I think there are different issues there. If you look at stop and search, for example, in big urban areas like London, there's a lot of tension between police and communities of colour. So, for example, in Brixton, historically, you know, we had riots there in the 70s and the 80s, and more recently after the Mark Duggan shooting. So there is a mistrust between the police and communities of colour at times in the UK. So it's not as simple to say, oh, that doesn't exist. It's just that, you know, the big difference between America, when I got here, people told me it's God, guns and government. And, you know, in these instances, it seems like guns are the problem. The police are interacting with people and they don't know if they're armed or not. So they're on edge. That then leads to more violence, and then you have this distrust of the community. In 2011, when Mark Duggan was killed, he was the only person killed by the police that year. That led to riots all over the country and a big kind of public life where people came together and said, like, what is going on in this country? If that was exacerbated by more instances of people being killed by the police, who knows what would have happened?
Right. One has to remember in Britain the numbers, but it's something like 400 people die in gunshot violence a year. In the United States, it's 30,000 if you count suicides. Angela, let me ask you: when you look at this, is this the common African American experience that is playing itself out when we think about Baton Rouge, when we think about the interaction with the police? Is this something that you think is part of American, African American life?
Well, I think a couple of things, Fareed. The first thing I would say to you is that there may be a common thread, right? But African Americans are certainly not monolithic in this country. There are differences. I was born on the West Coast, for example, in Seattle. My experiences are vastly different from someone that grew up in Philadelphia or New York, and they're different from what you see in the South. I think the one thing that I will say is common is when I am driving down the street in my vehicle and a police car is behind me, whether the lights are on or not, I get extremely nervous. And I would venture to say that I speak for a number of African Americans, not all, who have that same experience as well. You don't know what will happen. It is not unique only to black men. It is the experience also of black women. We can look at what happened with Sandra Bland. I think at some point the issue is we have to ID, and by that I mean just identify the fact that so much of this comes from the root of racism and what racism has done to every system in this country. That is what this country was built upon, or what I should say rebuilt upon, because that's not how the indigenous people intended. But when white people got here, this was a system that was built upon the systematic oppression of people of color. And until we're comfortable, Fareed, talking about that, talking about the root of racism and all of its ills, all of its societal, we're going to continue to have this problem, because this issue is also not unique to law enforcement exclusively. This is a problem that we see in our economic systems. It's a problem that we see in education. It's a problem we see across the board, because if you inherently believe that I am not equal, if you inherently believe at the very beginning that I'm 3/5 of a human being, then you're never going to treat me the same because you don't value my life the same. And that is the problem.
We are going to come back in a moment with